by the former Conservative Party leader Iain Duncan Smith. Welcome back to the programme. The House of Lords, as you know, is full of many qualified, well-qualified people. Do you welcome their involvement in this Brexit legislation?
Well, they're part of the Constitution, so of course they are part of it, and so I welcome. You know, the fact is that the bill was always going to go to the Lords. The Lords has an overwhelming majority, as far as I can make out, for people who want to remain in the EU. So it was always inevitable that they were going to pass a series of amendments. The government doesn't have a majority, crossbenchers, etc. So, yeah, it's kind of inevitable, really. Inevitable,
but,
you know, it's going to come back to the Commons, and so the objective of the government is to muster the right majorities to reverse most of those things. I'd have, you know, obviously they'll have to think about if there's some that they think are okay or others, but generally the idea is that they will try and get the bill back on track as it was. The Customs Union Amendment, for example, is a bit stupid, really, because it's amending a bill which has nothing to do with trade. The trade bill is the bill if they want to amend that. So they've stuck an amendment on a bill which has nothing to do with trade, which will come back at some point to be voted on. But yeah, I mean, they were always going to mess around with the bill. That was always expected, frankly.
Right. I mean, you say it's stupid because it's not attached to the right bill, the amendment on the Customs Union, but the government has now been defeated 6 times on its flagship piece of Brexit legislation, the EU withdrawal bill, 5 times in the Lords and once in the Commons. Are parliamentarians, in your mind, trying to thwart Brexit?
Well, I think certainly there are members of the House of Lords, I'm certain, who really do want to stop Brexit. They've said so. I mean, Lord Adonis has categorically said that his purpose in life is to end Brexit and to force the British public to think again. Some of them have been quite arrogant about what they said about the British public. One of them said they had to be forced into a different decision and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, there are those. There are others, I think, who probably genuinely have a view that they want certain modifications to the bill. And if they're reasonable and rational about that can be accommodated. But generally, I think it's a mix of those two things. Sometimes they collide together. As a result of that, then you get a vote like you got in the Lords on the Customs Union. But I do think that the government's policy, the vote at the time, was about getting out of the Customs Union, so I think we'll have to reverse that.
Will it empower, do you think, these defeats in the Lords, MPs in the Commons to do the same?
I don't think MPs need to be empowered by the House of Lords. I have to tell you that I know most of the MPs who feel strongly about this, and they will act, no doubt, on their own view about how they would work. I think the Lords just gives them, you know, an amendment coming back from the Lords gives another opportunity to people in the Commons to vote again. But I don't think I'd hate to say that MPs need to be told by the Lords how to vote. I think they're
not told, but they may feel that this gives them the freedom, the licence to vote against the government for Tory MPs who want to stay in the Customs Union.
I think, you know, MPs will make their own decisions about these things, but I think the Lords just gives them another opportunity to have a vote about some of these things when it comes back.
But why shouldn't the EU's Charter of Fundamental Rights be taken into UK law after Brexit? I mean, were people voting for that in the referendum?
No, but these are decisions that the government makes on what's best for the UK. I mean, the fact is the government itself wants to have its own essential charter. We don't want to import, essentially, a charter, which there are bits and pieces of which were never really agreed, even by Tony Blair's government. They tried to put blocks in as to how this would be applied, only to discover later on that those assurances about the non-application of elements of the Charter of Fundamental Rights were not worth anything, and therefore all of it can be and is being applied by the courts here. So the question really is, what do we think is best in Parliament for the UK? And therefore, instead of just importing the Charter of Fundamental Rights, far better for the UK to have its own proper Bill of Rights in which we actually set out what is right in terms of common law, etc., here in the UK.
But is it, as Lord Keane said, really the worst constitutional outrage since 1689, if it is incorporated?
Well, I think it would be a mistake. I think I agree with him in the sense that it's a mistake to try and have UK law set by governments that are not in the UK.
But you're going to paste over all the EU law into UK law with the withdrawal bill. So, I mean, that's all Lord Pannick was saying.
Yeah, but they're different. I mean, these are practical elements as to what we've agreed with regards to regulations, etc. What we're talking about here is an open-ended concept about how all the rights of UK citizens will be adjudicated against what template. That template is set in accordance with what the EU wants. What I think the UK should boldly do is to have its own concept of what those rights are for UK citizens and define it and design it themselves. And I think that's where the mistake comes.
This Thursday, there's going to be a vote in the House of Commons on the Customs Union. It's not going to be binding, and many have said it is symbolic. And there'll be similar votes, though, that will tie the government's hands in the future. What do you say to MPs, Conservative MPs like Bob Neill, who was sat in that chair yesterday, who want to vote for a Customs Union?
Well, I don't agree with them. I think that being out of the EU and in a customs union is literally almost the worst of all worlds, because you will have to accept not just the tariff situation where the EU sets the tariff levels on all products, but what has gone missing in this debate is that you'll also have to align most of your regulations with those of the EU on goods and services,
right,
because they're not going to allow you just to have a tariff wall. They'll need to know that the goods travelling across in a customs-free area have to be aligned. That
so it'll be a mistake, as you
well,
say, for MPs like Bob Neill.
As a country. I mean, look at Switzerland, for example. They're out of the customs union. They don't have to accept that. Their goods travel freely across the borders. In fact, per capita, more goods travel into the EU and sold in the EU than we do in the UK.
Right, although I have travelled across that border. There is some infrastructure there, particularly from Switzerland into France. But if we look at Theresa May's position, have you received assurances personally from the Prime Minister that she is not going to U-turn or concede on the issue of the customs union?
Oh, I'm utterly convinced that the Prime Minister's position is to leave the customs union.
Yeah.
I think the only question is what, therefore, are the arrangements that we make? And I think there's these two elements that they're talking about. One is what they call a partnership, and the other one is a highly accelerated process at the border.
And you'd accept a partnership, would you?
No, I think the partnership is too complicated and too complex, and I suspect they're going to arrive at that decision.
So if she agrees to that, for you, will that be U-turning on that central plank of Brexit legislation?
I don't think it works, and I think the government knows that.
Right.
So my view is that they will go with what they originally planned to go with, which is a much smoother border with high levels of technology, which is used in other parts of the world, and which actually even the European Parliament voted to get done for the European Union, and therefore they're saying that the borders with the UK could be a great way of implementing a much smoother process at the borders for the European Union as well.
If Theresa May is defeated on those crucial votes on the customs union, will she have to resign?
No, the Prime Minister, I don't believe, is going to be defeated. I think.
No, but if she was defeated, I mean, obviously that is a scenario that could happen. Will she have to resign if that's such a central plank?
The Prime Minister resigning at all. I think we've just got to get the European Union, get out of the European Union, and do exactly what the British people voted for. I mean, what keeps going missing in all of this is that Parliament gave the British public the right to decide did they want to leave the European Union. They said yes. What's going on at the moment tends to be seen by many of them, and I'm getting lots of letters from people saying, why is it that Parliament seems to have set its face against the vote?
And that's true, isn't it, Philippa?
Well, to be honest, there was such a poor referendum debate before the vote. A lot of people didn't get the chance to explore what the ramifications were. We're actually having more of a Brexit debate now than was had in the run-up to June 16. But obviously, one of the differences when this comes back is that Labour have moved. I mean, you know, for many Conservative rebels, there's no point in rebelling if you think Labour might just sit on their benches, whereas they've now said that they support a customs union. And so that might mean that the arithmetic changes. But I don't think a customs union on its own solves the issues. You know, tariffs are the smallest problem. It is the regulatory barriers that make the biggest difference. And obviously, being from Belfast myself, the customs union alone does not solve the Irish border problem.
But you think that the arithmetic is there for you and the Labour Party and a number of Tory rebels to defeat the government on this?
I think it's hard to know, but I think it'll be a lot closer than it was the last time.
Well, that will make it very difficult, won't it, for Theresa May?
Well, you know, when you're not got a majority government, every critical vote is critical. So, I mean, you know, we beat around the bush on this, but I actually happen to believe that the government's manifesto at the last election was very clear. The Conservative Party is for leaving the customs union, and I hope my colleagues will recognise that.
Well, we know that. But if she is defeated, will she just have to bend to the will of the Commons and say we'll remain in a customs union?
No, well, we can't remain in a customs union and favour the vote that was given by the British people. We made it clear at that time. By the way, it is worth reminding ourselves that the then Prime Minister, the Chancellor, all of the Remain crowd endlessly said, if you vote to leave the European Union, you must leave the customs union and the single market. So the public were not bamboozled by this. They knew what they were doing when they voted for this.
All right.
And that's really the key, I think.
Thank you very much.